Morning all. So now we are coming to the last part of the development of GIT, and that is the hindgut derivatives. Fine. So what are the hindgut derivatives? Can you just name the hindgut derivatives? That is the left 1/3 of transverse colon, then the descending colon, then the sigmoid colon, the rectum and the anal canal till the pectinate line. So that much is the derivatives of hindgut. Do you remember the midgut derivatives? When we are talking about the midgut derivatives, how far was it? It was from the duodenum till the opening of the bile duct. Below that, jejunum, ileum, cecum appendix, ascending colon and right 1/3 of transverse colon. That was the midgut derivative. So the rest other part, the left 1/3 of the colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon, rectum and anal canal till the pectinate line. That much is the derivatives or derived or developed from the hindgut. Fine. So why I was using the term till the pectinate line for anal canal? Do you remember in the initial classes I have mentioned at the exterior, that region where the GIT is opening into the exterior, that is at the mouth region, that is represented by stomodium, and at the anal region, that is at the proctodium. So what happens is at these two regions you get an ectodermal invagination at that tip. You get an ectodermal invagination. So all other regions will be endodermal in origin except that terminal parts, that is for the anal canal below the level of pectinate line. Fine. So now read that. Left 1/3 of transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon, rectum and upper part of anal canal till the pectinate line is derived from hindgut. So now what happens? Now what you see here is the hindgut, and you already know from the hindgut you will have a diverticulum coming and getting attached, and that is what is termed as the allantois. Fine. So this allantois getting attached to the hindgut will divide the hindgut into a pre-allantoic part and a post-allantoic part. Fine. So this allantois will divide the hindgut into a pre-allantoic and a post-allantoic part. This post-allantoic part is what is termed as cloaca. Fine. So what is cloaca? It is actually the post-allantoic part. So one thing you should know this cloaca is common or will develop into urinary bladder as well as rectum. So what happened? This cloaca have to be partitioned into an anterior part and a posterior part. Fine. So what happens? This cloaca will be partitioned by a septum in the center, and that is what is termed as urorectal septum. Fine. So this urorectal septum in the center will divide the post-allantoic part or the cloaca into an anterior part termed as the primitive urogenital sinus. Fine. And a posterior part termed as the primitive rectum. So look at that anterior part. That anterior part is termed as the primitive urogenital sinus. So that part in front will go or will develop into urinary bladder and urethra, and from the urinary bladder you have got the allantois coming. Fine. And the dorsal part will form the primitive rectum, which later develops into rectum and part of anal canal. So that is the change occurring to the cloaca. Okay. So look at that. You find the allantois. This is the allantois there. You find a urorectal septum developing in between. This urorectal septum will deepen, dividing the cloaca into an anterior part termed as the urogenital sinus and a posterior part termed as the primitive rectum. Okay, so this urogenital sinus you learn later when you're taking urinary bladder. It is going to develop as urinary bladder and urethra, and this primitive rectum will be of course continuous above with your pre-allantoic part of hindgut. So that is the change that is occurring to the cloaca or post-allantoic part. Now what happens is, you should know which all structures are derived from this pre-allantoic part and which all structures are derived from the post-allantoic part. So this pre-allantoic part will, or from the pre-allantoic part, you have got the left 1/3 of transverse colon, then descending colon and sigmoid column, and a part of the rectum till the middle valve of Houston. That much region will be developed from the pre-allantoic part, and below that you get the post-allantoic part or primitive rectum forming the rest of the rectum plus the upper part of the anal canal till the pectinate line. Fine. And one more thing you have to notice, this whole of the membrane or whole of the cloaca will be closed exteriorly by the cloacal membrane. Now what happens is, as this urorectal septa comes, it will subdivide the cloacal membrane into two. So that membrane which lies behind, that is at the primitive rectum, that is what is termed as anal membrane, and the membrane very close to your urogenital sinus, that is what is termed as the urogenital membrane. So this urorectal septa will divide the cloacal membrane into a urogenital membrane and an anal membrane. Now we are talking about the primitive rectum and anal canal. So what happens is, this anal membrane will rupture, thereby you get the communication with the exterior of GIT, exterior communicating with GIT. So what happens is, if there is something abnormal occurring for the anal membrane, or you find some rupture is not happening, or you find a canalization is not happening, that will lead to a clinical condition termed as imperforate anus. Fine? Okay. So that is the development of rectum. So the whole of the rectum derived from which all parts? It is from the hindgut. So you know the cloaca is being divided by the urorectal septum into urogenital sinus in front and behind the primitive rectum. So this primitive rectum will be continuous above with your pre-allantoic part of the hindgut, and of course all these structures that I have mentioned is now derived from the both the pre-allantoic as well as the primitive rectum. So read that, the same thing, the cloaca divided by urorectal septum into ventral primitive urogenital sinus, from which you have got the urinary bladder and urethra developing, and the dorsal part primitive rectum, from which the rectum and the upper part of the anal canal develops. Hope that much is clear to you. Okay. So now we come to the last part, anal canal. So you know anal canal is a hindgut derivative, and I already told you not all parts of the anal canal is derived from endoderm. Lower part below the pectinate line is ectodermal. That point should be there in your mind. That is produced as a result of ectodermal invagination of the proctodium. Fine. So initially you find all these two parts, the endodermal part that is forming the upper part, the lower part that is ectodermal, will be separated by an anal membrane which later ruptures, and that point where the anal membrane was present is represented in adult or in fetus as pectinate line. I think I'll show you the figure and then it will be clear. So look at that. This is the anal canal development. So upper part till the pectinate line is endodermal. The lower part below the pectinate line is ectodermal. You find at the line of communication, you find the anal membrane. Later what happens is you find the anal membrane rupturing, and the GIT, of course, communicating with the exterior. Now what happens is that line where the anal membrane was originally present is actually represented in fetus and adults by the pectinate line. And that is the same reason why you get a difference in nerve supply, you get a difference in arterial supply, venous drainage in that part above the anal canal and below the anal canal. This is the reason. That should be there in your mind always. Okay, fine. So now in that figure you are seeing the pectinate line, and above you find some difference above and below. There is a difference in arterial supply, venous drainage, nerve supply. Development above the pectinate line is which germ layer? It is endodermal. Below, ectodermal. Arterial supply above the pectinate line, it is superior rectal artery. Below, it is inferior rectal artery. Venous drainage above, superior rectal vein, which finally drains into portal system. That is important. Below, it is by the systemic veins. Drain inferior rectal, which is finally draining into systemic veins. Nerve supply above, it is by autonomic. Below, the pectinate line is by somatic nerves. So that is the difference in all these arterial supply, venous nerve. The main cause behind that is the developmental reason. Fine. So I think with that we finished the hindgut derivatives. So now you know the hindgut is derived from which all structures. And now can I ask you something? All these structures are supplied by the artery of hindgut. Which is the artery of hindgut? I think you know that. What is that? It is the inferior mesenteric artery. Fine. So now we come to the last part, applied anatomy. And when you think of the applied anatomy, one thing in the hindgut that should come to your mind is congenital megacolon, otherwise termed as the Hirschsprung's disease. So what is it? You find the parasympathetic ganglia will be actually absent in certain segment of mesenteric plexus. Fine. So in certain segment of mesenteric plexus of the colon, this parasympathetic ganglia will be absent. So what happens? You find a segment of colon will be dilated, and the usual presentation will be the baby will not have passed the meconium. No peristalsis will be there, and that is what is termed as Hirschsprung's disease. So look at that. This is the region. This of course is a normal presentation. This is a case of congenital megacolon, otherwise termed as Hirschsprung's disease. So in this region you find no ganglion cells presenting in this segment. So what happens? Proximal to that area affected, you find the colon will be distended, and there will be no peristalsis, and the baby won't be able to or will not have passed the meconium. Fine. So next is imperforate anus. I've already mentioned it before. Do you remember? I told you when the anal membrane fails to break down, that creates the imperforate anus. There are different varieties of imperforate anus. One is a simple variety where an anal membrane alone failed to break down. Put an incision, minor surgery, you will be able to correct it. But there are certain cases where the upper and the lower part are separated by solid mass of cells. So depending upon different varieties, depending upon the side effect, different varieties of imperforate anus could be described. Next is rectal fistula. When there is something abnormal in the urorectal septum, you find abnormal communication that is occurring between the rectum and the vagina, thereby producing a recto-vaginal fistula, recto-vesical fistula, all these things. A fistulous communication between the bladder and rectum. And commonly it could be associated with an imperforate anus. So I think with that we finish the hindgut derivatives. Just I want to include this also, that is situs inversus. Situs inversus, I think it's very familiar to you. This is a normal body, normal things, normal orientation of structures. Situs inversus is just the reverse of it. The liver, instead of seeing on the right side you view on the left side. Everything will be just the opposite. You find the orientation of heart is also changed, just the reverse. So that is what is termed as situs inversus. So I think with that we finish the development of GIT. So that is a very huge class, and I have subdivided into very small topics so that it will be easy for you to go through each topics and learn. Fine. So out of this, there are certain sure questions you get for your exams, like liver development, then what else, pancreas development, then the midgut rotation, like that, the derivatives of midgut. All these things are really very, very, very important for you, both for your Viva as well as the written exam. So just go through all these slides, learn them properly, and come for your exam also. So I think that much is clear to you. So shall I leave? Okay, thank you.